Alright, here is another video on the subject of what I call Mandela-affected history. And that is this new version of history that, for folks like us in this Mandela effect community, might find it just wildly unfamiliar. Just accounts from history, the historical narrative that we have never heard of before in our entire lives. And it just all of a sudden appears. And the best example of this, which has been going around the internet for a while in the Mandela effect community, is about the Black Tom explosion. And if you're unfamiliar with that, I first saw about a documentary in like 2018 before I knew anything about the Mandela effect. I saw this documentary about the Black Tom explosion, the first major terrorist attack in the United States. It happened in New York City, where some German spies snuck onto Black Tom Island and lit off an entire ammo dump with tons of munitions. And the explosion from that detonation blew out all the windows on the storefront of the waterfront in New York City, threw shrapnel into the arm of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and damaged it to the point where nobody was allowed to ascend into the torch for decades after that event. And anyway, so many of us have never heard of this event. And when I saw this documentary, I was like, no way, I've never heard of this before in my entire life. Apparently, that's what got us into World War One, which many of us from this, who remember our own accounts of history, always thought it was the German sinking of the Lusitania. That was the event that got the United States involved in World War One. Well, apparently it was the Black Tom explosion, which is new to me. And if you believe that's a Mandela effect, you will want to stay tuned to find out what else might be Mandela affected about history, particularly ancient history, which obviously no one alive today is going to have much of a frame of reference for what was actually going on thousands of years ago. So, anyway, I've covered this before in my previous video about Mandela affected history, about King Tut's burial mask. It went from a single cobra to a cobra and a vulture on his burial mask, which is wildly unfamiliar to so many people. Now let's look at the expression on his face. This is the expression that looks very familiar to me and many other people. Here's the Sphinx, a rendition of what the Sphinx perhaps looked like. And you can see that is a pretty blank or stoic, serious expression on the Sphinx, which is, I thought, was typical of most all statues in Egypt that I've ever seen until I saw this video. And I'm like, what's going on? Is this guy smiling in that statue? And he walks down the hall and zooms in on this statue, which also seems to have a bit of a smile. I'm like, that's strange. I've never seen Egyptian statues that appear to be smiling before. So let's ask, ChatGPT or Google's AI about smiling statues in Egypt. While most ancient Egyptian statues don't depict smiles, some examples of statues with smiles or sphinx-like faces have been found, like the recent discovery of a smiling sphinx near the Hathor Temple. The absence of widespread smiling in Egyptian art is often linked to cultural values that associated open displays of emotion, especially smiling with insincerity or untrustworthiness, particularly in positions of leadership. So that makes sense. That's what I would have understood about the depictions, the expressions on Egyptian statues that I've ever seen. So, serious expressions. In ancient Egyptian culture, leaders and individuals of high status were often depicted with calm, composed, and serious expressions, reflecting a sense of solemnity and dignity. Smiling is a sign of weakness. Smiling, particularly in public or during serious situations, was sometimes viewed with suspicion, suggesting a lack of seriousness or sincerity. So that's what, I kind of just thought that's what, Egyptians were depicted as not smiling. So let's look at the Mona Lisa. This is a well-known Mandela effect now, where I would say this is the familiar version for me of the Mona Lisa. Her expression was more or less blank, with a ever so slight turning of the corner of the lip where she might have a little bit of a smile, might be hiding a secret with that little smile, perhaps. But now, as you can see, this is what she looks like today, with comparatively a giant Joker's grin compared to how she looked like before. So, is this a trend that's now continuing to other works of art? This is very familiar to me. The serene Buddha smile, which, I would say is typical of many depictions of the Buddha in statues and artwork, having this serene, subtle smile. Okay, but would you ever imagine or think that this type of a smile would also be on a lot of Egyptian artwork? Well, for me, I would say no. I've never seen depictions like that before. Well, now we are. And obviously, if you're from this, for lack of a better word, timeline where you've always seen smiles on Egyptian statues, then you'll say, well, yeah, I've seen that before. But for me, this is new. And I would like to hear some feedback from folks as to whether or not they think this is new or not. But I think this is Ramses II. He seems to have a little bit of smile. This guy, I'm not really sure, but that looks more like a smile than the expressions that were on the Sphinx or King Tut's burial mask. This also looks like a smile to me. And any of these images you can screen grab and look up through an image search and see the authenticity of the artwork and when it was discovered, who it's depicting, and so forth. So these all look like warm, smiling expressions. And this seems just very unfamiliar to me. I think this is a new Mandela effect, that more and more artwork depicted in Egypt is now smiling. And some of them have distinct broad grins, like this guy. I was like, what? Is that real? Or is that some kind of a reproduction or what? But I looked it up, and it is indeed real. It's a wooden coffin from ancient Egypt. These coffins were often decorated with a smiling face, which was a common practice in the late period of Egyptian history. The smile on the coffin is not meant to depict the actual mood of the deceased, but to represent the hope for a happy afterlife. Interesting. I've never seen smiling burial masks or sarcophagus carvings. More of these smiling faces, which just seem very unfamiliar. And now they seem to be everywhere. I just saw that one video where it seemed like there were some statues that were smiling, and now I look it up, and turns out there's a whole bunch. This is actually a Greek general. I had to look this guy up because that's a very broad, distinct smile. The stone sculpture of Ptolemy E. Soter, who was a general under Alexander the Great and the founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. The bust dates back to approximately 305 BCE. The smile on the bust is not a natural expression, but a stylistic choice characteristic of the late 13th dynasty and early Ptolemaic period. The corners of the mouth are often drilled to create the appearance of a smile, which was not intended to convey emotion, but rather to represent an idealized and serene state, which this seems to contradict the first description about Egyptian statues not smiling and why they did not smile. Now it's saying, well, they do. Okay. And this is an interesting statue in and of itself because it is huge. It's a 100-ton granite sculpture of Ramses II. And he also seems to have a bit of a smile, which seems very strange. And I just do not remember the Egyptians having this technological capability to sculpt something this big out of solid granite with copper, hammers and chisels. That that's unbelievable. They used to just stack up limestone blocks and carve the image of a figure out of stacked blocks, not quarry, haul, sculpt, and erect something out of solid granite. That's just crazy. But, maybe I'm just learning something new. Or this is a Mandela effect where history has been altered somehow, some way to include this new technology, which I'm kind of a proponent of that. This is Hathor, which just this artwork seems strange. Just very unfamiliar to me. Also, that serene smile, which I've just never seen before. All these smiling figures in Egypt. Smiling face with dimpled cheeks. Mini Sphinx unearthed in Egypt. This was in 2023. This guy's got a smile on his face. Another Sphinx, unearthed in 2018 in Aswan. He seems to be smiling a bit. It also doesn't look like a very Egyptian-looking face to me. I don't know. And I thought this was interesting. Marge Simpson painting discovered on ancient Egyptian tomb goes viral. And this is real. This is a real tomb that was recently unearthed, where on the inside it looks like a painting of Marge Simpson with blue hair, yellow skin, and a full-length green dress identical to the one that Marge Simpson wears. This is crazy. And I think this might be part of a new trend with the Mandela effect, where we will suddenly be, unearthing things that just seem wildly out of place for the time period that they're in. Who knows? Maybe you'll find a carving or a painting of Mickey Mouse with his red pants and white buttons, and they'll say, oh well, this is just the Egyptian rat god, whatever. But you can clearly look at it and say, that's Mickey Mouse. Just like looking at this. That's Marge Simpson. So yeah, I like to promote that kind of concept, that maybe this is a subtle wink and a nod from the universe, or whatever, suggesting that reality is not always what we expect, and there might be some new things to discover in this arena. And I like to keep my videos open to all audiences and invite all views and opinions and perspectives on this, and see what you think. What do you think about these smiling statues now in Egypt, or stuff like this just showing up in newly unearthed, discoveries, whatever they might be, wherever they might be, and how they strangely seem to relate to the modern era. So yeah, let me know what you think about this. Thanks.